Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Chapter 1. The Big Hairy Bull. It was a cold, grey day in London in the early 1900s. I walked quickly down the crowded street to the office of the Daily Gazette. I was a 23-year-old reporter for the popular London newspaper. That day, I was looking for danger and adventure. I needed danger and adventure. If I could write about danger and adventure, I could marry Gladys. Gladys was the love of my life. She wanted to marry a hero, and I was going to be one for her. I finally got my wish when my editor let me interview the most dangerous man in London, Professor George Edward Challenger. No one else at the Gazette wanted to do it. No one wanted to go near the mad professor. But I was ready to do anything for Gladys. So as I left the office for the professor's home, I was the happiest reporter in London. Even my editor's words couldn't stop me.
The man is a bully, Ned. Whatever you do, don't talk about the Amazon River expedition. It's a dangerous subject. It seems that 2 years ago, some fellow scientists called him a liar. He brought back a photograph of something he said was a prehistoric animal. Only last week, he threw 2 or 3 reporters into the street just because they said the word Amazon. Now he hates reporters. So run as fast as you can if he gets angry.
The professor's butler led me into the study. There were shelves of books from the floor to the ceiling. There were lots of maps and models of strange animals on a long table. And suddenly, there he was, the great man himself.
Ned Malone, of the Daily Gazette, sir.
I didn't expect something so huge. He looked like a big, hairy bull, not a great zoologist. He had a big, round face and dark, grey eyes with huge, thick eyebrows. A long, black, pointed beard went all the way to the middle of his great, big chest. His shoulders were huge. Long, black hair covered his big, fat hands. He frowned. He was just plain scary.
Well, what do you want?
He roared like a wild animal, and I tried to be brave.
Well, sir, some other scientists are talking about new ideas on the history of life on Earth. Ideas that don't agree with yours. Do you still believe what you said 2 years ago? Or are you changing your thoughts? Our readers want to know.
What new ideas?
Well, of course, sir. You must be right, but...
He frowned again. I knew I was in trouble.
You reporters think you are so smart. I'm going to throw you into the
Before he
street
could grab me, I squeaked out a reply.
I'm just asking, sir. People want to know about the Amazon River expedition.
In my fear, I forgot the words of my editor.
Whatever you do, don't talk about the Amazon River expedition.
What did you say?
The big, hairy bull roared again.
Well?
And I opened the door quickly before he jumped on me. He shouted and yelled as we rolled together down the hall. We knocked over tables and chairs and lamps on our way. Finally, we fell out the front door into the street. When we stopped, he leapt to his feet. His face was red and he was out of breath. Then he looked at me and made that wild animal noise again.
I'm not finished with you yet.
My editor was right. The big hairy bull was a bully. I did not have time to speak or to run before he ordered me back into the house. The butler closed the door behind us. Back inside his study, the professor was calmer. He showed me an old book.
You were brave enough to come inside again, so I am going to tell you about the Amazon River expedition. Please do not speak until I finish, and you must promise not to tell anyone. If you cannot promise, you may leave.
Then I promise.
2 years ago, I went to the Amazon River to study the animals there. An Indian chief I knew there gave me this book. It's full of maps and drawings. It belonged to an old American explorer who died there. His name was Maple White. Look at this page.
I saw a drawing of an amazing creature. It was standing on a large, high plateau. It had a head like a bird and a body like a giant lizard. There were giant spikes from the top of its head to the tip of its long tail. A tiny man stood in front of it.
Well, what do you think of that?
I didn't know what to think, so I asked a question.
Why did he draw the man so small?
He drew himself there to show how big the creature was. I took these drawings and followed White's maps. I wanted to find the creature myself. But our boat turned over on the river, and we had to come home. We never made it up to Maple White's plateau.
He showed me a photograph of a strange animal standing on a huge rock.
This was the only thing I could save. It looked strange because it was almost ruined when I pulled it out of the river. That's why people called me a liar.
But it looks like the plateau in White's drawing.
Exactly.
Then he showed me something else. It looked like part of a large bat's wing. He shook it at me and shouted,
I shot this beast! This piece of wing was the only proof I had of my work. The rest sank with the boat.
I believed him. I had the proof I needed to write my story. The drawing, the photograph, and now the wing. What's best, I was alive after a fight with the most dangerous man in London. But there was one more thing I had to know.
How did these animals get onto the plateau?
I believe that long ago there was a huge explosion under the earth. It lifted up that piece of land, with all the animals on it, and made the plateau. Because there are snakes and insects all around the bottom, people could not climb up, and the animals could not get down.
Did you show these things to anyone? Did you explain your idea?
The professor nodded.
Yes, but no one believed me. When they called me a liar, I turned into the crazy beast you just saw. But tonight, I am going to introduce the popular naturalist Percival Waldron at the Zoological Institute. He is going to give a speech about the record of the ages. I plan to stay calm while he rewrites the history of our planet. Then I am going to say a few words about my own work.
He smiled proudly.
Why don't you come along, Mr. Malone?
Chapter 2. The Perfect Chance.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank Mr. Waldron for his speech. But I say that Mr. Waldron is wrong. He is wrong because prehistoric animals still live on Earth today.
Everyone was quiet. Then, suddenly, the audience laughed and shouted.
Prove it! How do you know?
The professor raised his hands and spoke.
How do I know? I know because I went to their secret kingdom. I know because I saw them there.
And then we heard that awful word.
Liar! 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 Did someone call me a liar? Will whoever called George Edward Challenger a liar please stand up?
When a group of students stood and bravely shouted it,
Liar!
an usher quickly showed them to the door. Then the famous Professor Summerlee stood. Summerlee was tall and thin with grey hair and round shoulders. He did not like Professor Challenger. Professor Summerlee wanted to make Challenger look like a madman. He wanted it more than anything else in the world. He smiled as he spoke.
Did you really find prehistoric animals on an expedition to the Amazon just 2 years ago?
I did.
And do you really expect us to believe you?
I do.
Can you tell us exactly where to find these creatures?
I can.
Well then, where are they?
I will tell only one person. The brave man who is ready to go there himself.
When Summerlee agreed to go, Challenger looked straight at him.
Fine, but you must be careful. It is a very dangerous place, and I want someone to go with you. Since you don't believe me, I want someone to keep an eye on you, someone young and strong. Is anyone here interested?
It was the perfect chance to be a real hero for my Gladys. I shouted and jumped up with joy.
Yes, yes! I want to go. I must go.
Just then, a tall man with dark red hair and a moustache stood up.
I am Lord John Roxton. I know the Amazon well, and I speak the language of the natives.
Challenger knew Roxton.
We all know the great explorer Lord Roxton, and this young reporter can write everything down. I say they both go with Professor Summerlee to prove that what I say is true.
I think the man is talking absolute nonsense.
Chapter 3. The Journey Begins.
It was a wet, foggy morning in late spring. The three of us walked along the dock to our ship, the Francisco. She was waiting to carry us to the other side of the Atlantic and our great adventure. Professor Summerlee couldn't wait to make Professor Challenger look like a madman. Lord John Roxton couldn't wait to hunt the biggest animals on Earth. And I followed with a cart full of supplies, blankets, guns, and notebooks. I couldn't wait to be a hero for Gladys. Suddenly, someone shouted.
Hey!
And we heard great, heavy footsteps. It was Professor Challenger.
Take this envelope. Open it when you get to a town called Manaus on your way up the Amazon.
The professor wrote something on the outside.
Open it on this date and at this time. Goodbye, gentlemen.
And then Professor George Edward Challenger smiled and walked away. After a long ocean journey, we arrived at Para, the main port at the mouth of the Amazon. We stopped there to take on help for the expedition. We hired a huge African named Zambo to carry our equipment, a native, Gomez, to cook for us, and 3 Indians to guide us. We then set off on the steamer that was going to take us up the Amazon. 1 week later, we came to Manaus. It was time to open Professor Challenger's envelope. We sat at a round table in the garden outside our hotel. The golden sun shone on the palm trees. The air was warm and still. Big blue butterflies flew about as we waited to open the envelope. It said, "To Lord John Roxton and team. Open at Manaus on the 15th of July at 12 o'clock. Lord John opened it and took out a piece of paper. It was blank. I could think of only one thing.
Invisible ink.
No!
I knew that wild animal voice. We jumped to our feet and saw Professor Challenger right there in front of us.
You didn't really think, Professor Summerlee, that I could stay behind?
Summerlee frowned, but Lord John was happy.
I must say, Professor, it's good that you came.
Thank you, Lord John. Is everything ready for the expedition?
Lord John nodded. Professor Challenger then said good night.
See you in the morning, gentlemen. We'll set off early.
We continued up the Amazon for 6 days. Then Professor Challenger sent the boat back to Manaus so that no one could follow us. We put our supplies into 2 canoes and got ready to leave. It was time to enter the secret kingdom. But something strange happened the night before we left. It almost spoilt our journey. A fight broke out between our native, Gomez, and Zambo, our African. It seems that Zambo caught Gomez spying on Challenger, Summerlee, Roxton and me. We were discussing our plans when Zambo caught him under the window of our hut.
Let's go as far as we
Gomez whipped out his knife and tried to attack Zambo. But Zambo was stronger and faster and took the knife away. Lord Roxton grabbed Gomez by the shoulders and shook him angrily. He made the native promise never to do such a thing again.
I never want to see or hear.
Then he put him in front of Zambo and made the 2 of them shake hands. Everything seemed all right then, at least for the time. We left the next morning without any more trouble. The professors fought like cat and dog every day.
That's ridiculous.
We finally put 1 professor in each canoe to stop the fights. It worked, and we paddled up the river in peace. Our professors pointed out many wonderful things to us. We saw great trees and heard the sounds of strange animals. It was a beautiful place, and we learnt much from our river trip. But on the 3rd day, we heard a strange sound. Our Indians were scared and upset. Lord John knew the sound too.
War drums. I know them well.
Gomez was not as calm.
Wild Indians. They are close. They see us. They want to kill us. The drums talk to each other. They want to kill us.
For once, the 2 professors agreed.
Cannibals, Professor Summerlee.
Of course, Professor Challenger.
We continued on our way, ready for attack. Finally, the sound of the drums began to fade, and we tied up our canoes for the night and slept.
Chapter 4. The Secret Kingdom.
Early next afternoon, we said goodbye to the great Amazon River. We paddled our canoes into a calm, clear stream where we couldn't hear the drums. It was the opening to Challenger's secret kingdom. Gomez and the Indians finally calmed down. A great jungle cat with big green eyes stared at us. Birds of every color sang in the trees. Strange fish swam through the cool, clean water. Soon, the stream became too narrow for our canoes, so we hid them in the bushes. We took our supplies and began the hard part of our journey on foot. Nine days later, we came to a huge bamboo forest. We cut a path through it and set up camp for the night. In the daylight next morning, we saw the red cliffs of Maple White's plateau. Suddenly, Professor Challenger pointed to the sky and shouted with excitement.
Look! Look!
A huge grey bird rose up slowly from the ground. At first, it flew low and straight. Then it was high above the trees and over the plateau.
That, gentlemen, was a pterodactyl.
Summerlee laughed so hard he almost fell over. But Lord John had his spyglass on it.
Well, I can say that wasn't like any bird I ever saw before in my life.
Then, when the beast flew away, we saw something terrible. We saw that the cliffs of the plateau went straight up and curved out at the top. We could not climb them. We left Sambo and the others at the camp. We searched all round the bottom of the cliffs, but we couldn't find a way up. Then, back at camp, something found us. A huge rock suddenly raced past the cliffs. It almost crashed onto our heads. We could not see where it came from, but we knew it was aimed at us. Who didn't want us here? Who wanted us dead? That night, Lord John shot something tasty for our dinner. We cooked it on our fire in the cool night air. It was chilly at night, so we sat close to the fire to keep warm. There was no moon, but we could see some stars. Then, before our food was cooked, something amazing happened. Something awful appeared out of the darkness. It was huge and powerful, and it dived at us like an aeroplane. It roared over us and covered us with its huge wings. I could see it for only a second. It had a long neck, red eyes, and a great beak full of shiny little teeth. Suddenly, in the next second, it was gone. And so was our dinner. A huge black shadow hid the stars, and soon the beast disappeared over the cliff. We all sat round the fire and stared at the sky. Summerlee spoke first.
Professor Challenger, I was very wrong. I am sorry, sir.
Our first pterodactyl. And for the first time, the two professors shook hands.
Chapter 5. Gomez, Guns and Monsters.
Eureka! I have the answer.
It was just getting light next morning. Summerlee sat up and spoke in a sleepy voice.
Did you find a way up the cliffs?
Challenger pointed to a tall, thin rock. It was as high as the plateau and about 12 meters away from it.
We must get to the top of that rock. I have a plan.
After breakfast, we took our tools and ropes and climbed the rock. When we got to the top, we could see for miles. We could even see back to where we started. Then Challenger pointed to a huge tree about 20 meters tall.
This tree is going to be our best friend.
Lord John agreed.
That's it! A bridge!
Gomez and Zambo brought up our guns, cartridges and supplies. We cut down the tree so that it fell across the gap between the tall, thin rock and the plateau. One by one, each of us took some supplies across. Challenger sat on the tree and hopped over. Summerlee followed. I went next and tried not to look down. Lord John just walked calmly across. Finally, we stood upon Maple White's plateau. But as we took our first steps into this strange land, something awful happened. We heard a terrible crash and ran back to the edge of the cliff. From the top of Maple White's lost world, we saw our tree bridge lying at the bottom. It's a good thing it did not kill Zambo, who was about to bring up more supplies. But some of the branches knocked him over, and he was lying in a pile of food tins and wood. The next thing we saw was Gomez on the tall, thin rock across from us. He shook his fist at us as he shouted,
Lord John Roxton, you English dog! You can stay there! I waited and waited for this. Now I have you, you and your friends, every one of you!
We just stood there and stared at him. We did not understand how he could do something so wicked.
I didn't kill you with a rock by the cliffs, but this is better. It is slower and more painful. As you die over there, think of Lopez, my brother. Think of how you shot him 3 years ago in Peru. Now, I can die happy.
Lord John remembered Lopez. He was a thief and an Indian killer. He got what he asked for. Lord John raised his rifle. But Gomez quickly slipped down the rope, which he cut well before he dropped to the ground. He raced past Zambo, who was still stuck in the branches, and got away. We never saw him again. Zambo pulled himself out of the mess, and we could see that he was safe. He could not get to us now, so he waved goodbye and promised to wait for us at the bottom. If all went well, we could meet our loyal friend when we found our way down. We cut down some branches and thorns and put them in a circle under a tall tree. We put our supplies inside and called the circle Fort Challenger. We sat in our new camp and talked about a plan. Lord John led the meeting.
As long as nothing sees us or hears us, we are safe. We must explore the land. We need to know what's out there, but we mustn't fire our guns unless it is a matter of life or death.
We named the plateau Maple Whiteland. Our next step was to find out what else lived there. We left Fort Challenger and followed a little stream nearby. We moved away from camp slowly and carefully. It was a strange but beautiful land. Everywhere there were trees and plants and flowers that grew millions of years ago. They were big and beautiful and full of color. When we found some fresh tracks in the soft ground, Challenger stopped us. We knew something huge was close.
Aha! Iguanodons! Nothing else could make these tracks.
In the wood, towards a clearing, we saw 5 of them. They were huge, like giant kangaroos. They had skin like black crocodiles and thick, strong tails. Even the babies were as big as elephants. They shook the earth as they played round their parents. One of them ripped a tree out of the ground like it was a blade of grass. This was a dangerous neighborhood. A few kilometers along the stream, Lord John held up his hand. He pointed to something up ahead. We saw a huge pit full of bubbling, smelly green slime. It was a nest of pterodactyls. Whole families of them sat round the pit. At first, they didn't see us. But Challenger was too excited to stay still. When one of the creatures saw him, it rose into the air. Others followed it. Their huge wings almost blocked out the sun. They flew in a circle over our heads, and their red eyes watched us. They were hungry, and we were going to be lunch. A long neck dived at us. Then another and another came. The creatures screamed and dived at us with open beaks. We thought they were going to eat us alive. Blood covered Summer Lee's face, and I felt one at the back of my neck. Challenger fell when one tried to grab him in its mouth. When I tried to pick him up, it came after me. Then I heard Lord John's gun, and the creature fell to the ground. There was blood everywhere. Lord John shouted an order.
Run for your lives!
And we did.
Chapter 6. Attack of the Toad Monster.
Night came, and we were safe in the thick woods. We were tired and scared, but none of us was badly hurt. We found our little stream and bathed our wounds in the cool water. We rested on the soft leaves and knew we were lucky to be alive. But when we got back to our camp, we had another surprise. We found huge tracks, and our things were all over the ground. Something strange and powerful was busy at Fort Challenger while we fought the pterodactyls. We searched and found nothing, but we wondered what waited for us in the dark. Later that night, terrible screams and cries woke us. Nothing on earth could have sounded more terrible. Nothing could have scared us more. We knew something was going to die. The killer was close to our camp, and it was very, very dangerous. Then another sound, low and evil, came from the same place. It started deep inside the killer's throat and grew louder and louder. For a minute the sounds roared and cried together. And then there was no sound at all. We made no sound either. We stayed still inside Fort Challenger, hoping for the danger to pass. But soon we heard huge feet thumping towards our gate. Lord John told us to stay quiet.
Don't move, don't speak, and don't shoot.
We heard the heavy breath of something, but we saw nothing. Then we heard leaves and stones under its feet. Lord John peeked through the thorns, and I looked over his shoulder. I couldn't see well in the dark, but there was something huge out there. It was about as high as a horse, but wider and heavier than even the biggest horse on earth. Shiny green eyes stared right at us from a head like a giant toad's. Fresh blood dripped from its open mouth, the blood of the poor beast it just killed. Lord John took some burning branches from the fire. Then he pushed them through the thorns into the creature's eyes. It screamed, and the whole plateau shook. Then it disappeared into the night. Lord John just sighed.
Let's get some rest.
Next morning, we found out where the screams came from. It was the place of the iguanodons. We found a terrible mess. There were huge pools of blood. Mountains of iguanodon meat and bones covered the ground. The professors looked at every piece. Summerlee was sure it was a meat-eating dinosaur. Professor Challenger wasn't as sure.
Yes, it was a meat-eater, but we don't know it was a dinosaur. Even Lord John and our young reporter here couldn't see enough to give us a clue. We may never know.
And so we left the place of the iguanodons without an answer. It was enough work for one day. Later that afternoon, Summerlee had a surprise for us.
I want to leave this plateau. We know that Professor Challenger was right. Now there is no reason to stay.
Challenger, of course, did not agree.
I am not going to leave before we have something to take home with us.
Just then, I had an idea. If we climbed the tall tree inside our fort, we could see everywhere on the plateau. We could make a chart of Maplewhite Land. Lord John agreed.
That's it, young fellow, you've got it. We've got about an hour till it gets dark. Take your notebook up there and make your chart.
As I climbed, I could see more and more of this amazing place. About halfway up, I leaned round the trunk. As I looked the other way, I nearly fell out of the tree.
Ah!
There in front of me was another human face. It was long, ugly and white, with lots of whiskers. It had a flat nose, shiny grey eyes, and its chin stuck way out. The rest of it was covered with shaggy red hair. I could smell its awful breath when it growled at me. Then it dived through the branches and ran away. An ape man! I was too far up to go back, so I climbed to the top of the tree. I could see the whole plateau below me, the woods, the place of the iguanodons, and the pit of the pterodactyls. There was a beautiful lake in the center. Far on the other side, I saw dark holes like caves. As it got dark, something shone inside them. They looked like portholes on a ship at sea in the night. Fires! But who or what lit them? I drew until it was dark. Then I climbed down with my chart. When the others shook my hand, I finally felt like a hero. Then I told them about the ape man. Challenger jumped about and shouted.
Did it have a tail? What colour was it? Was it tall, short, fat, thin?
Summerlee didn't care.
Now that we have our chart, let's get out of this awful place.
Chapter 7. Where is everybody?
Late that night, when the others were asleep, I took a gun and left the fort.
If I can make a chart of the plateau from here, maybe I can do something even braver outside the safety of the fort.
I followed our little stream. Soon I came to a huge rock at the side of the lake. I could see far around me. I lay down there in the silver moonlight. I thought it was the most beautiful place on earth. Soon the gentle sounds of the wood put me to sleep. Suddenly, a gunshot woke me. Did my friends wake up and wonder where I was? Did they think I was lost out here? Did they fire the shot to guide me back? I ran back to camp as fast as I could. When I came to the fort, my friends were gone. Next to the campfire was a huge pool of blood. I shouted and shouted for Challenger, Summerlee, and Roxton.
Summerlee!
No one answered.
Lord John!
I searched the wood for hours until daylight, but I found nothing. I was so worried I didn't know what to do. Whose blood lay on the ground? Where did they go? I felt like a little child with no one to take care of me. I couldn't see any tracks. I couldn't find any clues, even in the light of day. Finally, I sat on the ground and wrote down my thoughts. And that is where I stayed until dark. Then I gathered some branches and lit a fire. I ate a good supper and went to sleep. In the grey light next morning, a strong hand shook me. I cried with joy when I saw Lord John beside me.
Lord John!
His face was bloody. His clothes were in rags and his hat was gone.
Quick, young fellow, get the rifles! Don't stop or talk or think or we're dead!
I was only half awake, but I took the guns and ran after him. We ran through the wood until we came to some thick bushes. There, Lord John fell onto the ground and pulled me down into the bushes beside him. When I finally got my breath, I turned to Lord John.
What happened? Where are the professors? And who is after us?
Ape men! Where were you last night?
I whispered my story in a few sentences. Then Lord John told me his.
It was morning. The professors weren't even fighting yet. Suddenly it rained apes like apples from a tree. I shot one through the belly over by the fire. But before we could run, they tied us up with vines. They were big fellows and strong. They dragged us to their town near the edge of the cliff. They've got about 1,000 huts made of branches and leaves. They left us with a big bully who guarded us with a club. We saw the natives who lit those fires you saw. They live on the far side of the plateau, poor fellows. The ape men live on this side, and there's nothing but fighting between them all the time. Yesterday, the ape men killed 2 of them right in front of us. Remember that bamboo forest where we camped before we got up here? It's right under Ape Town at the bottom of the cliff. They pushed the poor fellows right over the cliff onto the bamboos. The sticks went through them like knitting needles through butter. I knew if we could get our guns, we could make it. So I gave that bully a kick in the tummy and ran for camp. Now here we are in the bushes, halfway to Ape Town.
But the professors!
They're still at Ape Town, waiting for us.
We moved quietly through the bushes to the cliff. About 2 hours later, we could see the huts of Ape Town.
Chapter 8. The Battle of the Ape Men.
About 100 of the shaggy creatures stood by the cliff at the edge of Ape Town. Some of them were huge, and all of them were ugly. In front of them was a small group of Indians. They glowed like copper in the strong sunlight. Summerlee was there beside them. He was so scared he couldn't move. Challenger was with him. His clothes were torn, and his hair was a mess. Suddenly, 2 of the ape men grabbed an Indian and threw him over the cliff. Then they grabbed Summerlee. When Challenger tried to save the professor, one of the ape men pushed him aside. It was the last thing the hairy beast ever did. Lord John took 1 shot, and that was the end of him. Then I got my orders.
Shoot right at them! Shoot!
I did, and the professors, Roxton and I ran like the wind to Fort Challenger. Lord John turned and fired again and again at the ape men who followed us. Soon they were all gone. When we got back inside the fort, we thought we were alone. But a gentle cry outside surprised us. We looked out from our circle of thorns and saw 3 little Indians. In a tired voice shaking with fear, one of them was begging us for help. There was no mistake about that. Somehow they escaped. Lord John was surprised.
What do we do with these people?
The only thing we can do is take them back to their home.
Lord John looked at me.
Our young friend here knows where they live, but I think it's far away.
I nodded. It was at least 20 miles.
Then we must move and move quickly.
With that, we set off to take the Indians home. The Indians were small, gentle, red men. They had long black hair and wore pieces of leather for clothes. Their feet were bare and they didn't have hair on their faces. One of them pointed to himself and said just one word.
Maretas.
Professor Challenger looked at him carefully.
I think our friend Maretas here is a chief.
Maretas looked very young, but the others were very polite to him. They walked behind him as he led us into the open country. We didn't see any more ape men. Later that afternoon, we came to the lake in the center of the plateau. An old Indian met us there, and then he ran and hugged Maretas.
Maretas.
He was the young chief's father. Maretas pointed to us as he spoke to the others. We did not know any of the words he was using, but he used a kind of sign language too. It was so lively and clear that we understood him easily.
These strange men are our friends. They use the thunder and lightning to protect us.
He pointed to our rifles.
They can help us live safely in the future.
The little red Indians cheered, and Lord John turned to us.
I want to help our little red pals here fight the ape men. What about you?
We all agreed. Lord John turned to the old chief. Then he nodded and slapped his rifle. The old fellow and his men cheered louder than ever. We left the village next morning with 400 or 500 Indians. The Indians spread out in a long line. Roxton and Summerlee stood with them on the right. Challenger and I stayed on the left. We did not wait long for our enemy. Suddenly, a crowd of ape men screamed from the wood. Then they ran towards us with clubs and stones. They were brave, but they were slow. They could not get away from the little Indians, who moved like cats. They screamed and howled and rushed through the bushes, but we were stronger. When they ran for their lives to Ape Town, we killed most of them. The Indians threw the rest of them over the cliff. They fell onto the sharp bamboo sticks 600 feet below. The ape men were dead. All of them.
Chapter 9. The Secret Cave.
After the battle, even Professor Challenger agreed it was time to go home. But we learnt one thing quickly. The Indians were not going to help us leave. They thought we were supermen with powerful weapons. They did not want us to go anywhere. We made friends with them, but we kept our plans a secret. Only Maretas understood how much we wanted to go home. In the meantime, Zambo still waited for us in his little camp at the bottom of the cliff. I went back to tell him about our last fight with the ape men and let him know that we were now camped on the other side of the plateau. But on the way, I had a strange experience. I saw Lord John near the pit of the pterodactyls. He wore something very strange around him. A bell-shaped cage.
Lord John, what are you doing up here? What is that thing around you?
I'm visiting my friends, the pterodactyls. I made this cage so they can't get too friendly with me.
But what do you want in the pit?
I'm going to study them. I'm going to get a young one for Challenger. See you back at camp tonight.
Back in the Indian village that evening, our luck began to change. Maretas brought a small roll of leather to our camp. He pointed up at the row of caves above us. He put his finger to his lips as a sign to keep it a secret. My friends and I unrolled the leather and studied it by our campfire. There was a row of marks on the inside, and a cross under one of them. Lord John suddenly grabbed it.
Hang on. How many marks are here? 18. Well, there are 18 caves in the cliffs above us. This is a map of the caves. This cross marks the one which goes through. We can get down from the plateau through this cave.
As always, when something exciting happened, Challenger couldn't stay quiet.
We can use some vines to climb down from there.
Then Summerlee had a good idea.
And the Indians don't live in these caves. They live in the ones below. These are only storehouses. I say we check them out now while it's dark.
We each took a log torch and climbed up from our little camp to the cave marked with the cross. When we got deep inside, we lit our torches. About 30 meters further inside, we saw a bright light. There was a hole at the end of the cave. We didn't hear anything, and we didn't feel any heat from it. Nothing moved, but it glowed in front of us. Then Lord John pointed to it.
The moon! We got through. We didn't see it when we went around the bottom of the plateau because it was daylight. There's enough space for us to get through with our gear. And look, the ground is not far below us.
Next evening, we were ready to leave. We worked quickly and quietly. We took only our guns and cartridges. But Challenger had some very heavy things he was not going to leave behind. He also had one special heavy case that was very hard to carry. But we knew that our faithful Zambo would be waiting to help us when we got to the bottom. We quietly left our camp in the Indian village and climbed the steps to the cave. When we got our things inside, we looked out one last time over that strange land. Then we walked through the cave, which led to home.
Chapter 10. The Real Thing.
It was the 7th of November. Every seat in the great Queen's Hall was full. Professor George Edward Challenger was going to tell the world about his great adventure. Some of the greatest scientists in the world were there, and so was all the Zoological Society. The Duke of Durham led the meeting.
Quiet, please.
Challenger, Summerlee, Roxton and I walked onto the stage and took our seats. Summerlee then spoke about all our adventures on the plateau. The audience stood up and cheered. Of course, a few unfriendly people shouted at him.
Show us another one! You don't have any proof!
Professor Challenger jumped to his feet.
I do have proof of our work. True, we could not bring home everything we found, but we can tell you a lot about the pterodactyl. We can tell you things you never knew before.
We heard more shouts.
Rubbish!
What a joke!
Oh, what a man!
The Duke of Durham ordered the audience to be quiet.
Quiet! Quiet!
Professor Challenger spoke again.
I can show you a picture of the pterodactyl which will make...
A scientist from Edinburgh stopped him.
A picture is not the real thing.
That was exactly what Challenger wanted to hear.
Must you see the real thing?
Yes, of course.
I watched Challenger's round face and saw him smile.
And you could believe that?
The scientist from Edinburgh laughed.
Yes. Yes, of course.
When Professor Challenger raised his hand, I went to the back of the stage. I returned quickly with Zambo. We carried that special heavy case which gave us so much trouble before. We put it carefully in front of the professor. The audience was quiet. Professor Challenger took the top off the case. He looked down into it and snapped his fingers. In a soft, gentle voice, he spoke to something inside.
Come now, pretty.
Something scratched and rattled around inside. Then, the ugliest creature alive hopped onto the side of the case. It was so ugly that the Duke of Durham thought he was looking at the devil itself. He fainted into the orchestra. No creature could have looked wilder. No mad artist could have painted anything uglier. At first, no one could speak. No one could move. Everyone stared. No one could believe what they saw. The evil face, the small red eyes as bright as burning coals. Its long neck jerked back and forth. The slimy beak, full of shiny little teeth, opened up. Yes, it really did look like the devil. And then it moved its wings. 3 more people on the stage fainted into the orchestra. The audience screamed, and people ran for the windows and doors. Professor Challenger threw his hands up and tried to calm them, but instead, he frightened the creature. It spread its wings and rose from the side of the case into the air. Challenger jumped up and tried to catch its legs, but his fat, hairy fingers could not reach them. The thing flew slowly round the great Queen's Hall. Its 10-foot wings moved up and down, as it screamed and slime dripped from its awful mouth. The screams from the audience scared it even more. It flew faster and faster as it tried to get out of the room. It crashed into the walls and bumped into the ceiling. Every time it hit something, it screamed even louder. Then it found a large open window. Professor Challenger screamed at the top of his voice.
The window! Shut that window!
But it was too late. In only a minute, the creature squeezed through it and escaped into the night sky over London. Professor Challenger fell into his chair with his face in his hands. He cried like a baby, while the audience moaned and sighed. No one ever found out what happened to the London pterodactyl. No one, in London anyway, ever saw it again. There were many reports the evening after it escaped. One said that a royal guard was sent to jail because he left his post without permission. He said he dropped his rifle and ran when he saw the devil flying across the moon. A Dutch-American ship saw something as it sailed towards South America. Some kind of body raced past it in the middle of the air. It looked half like a flying goat and half like a huge bat. And then there was Gladys. Only a cruel woman could do what she did. Only a cruel woman could forget about love. I risked my life to be her hero, but she didn't care. When I got to her home after the pterodactyl disaster, I expected words of love. I got none.
What are you doing here?
You are my little Gladys, aren't you?
No, she is not.
A little red-haired man entered the room.
Didn't you get my letter at Para?
The love of my life spoke quietly. Then I saw the wedding ring on Gladys's hand.
No, I didn't get your letter.
Oh, what a pity. I told you everything.
Everything was now very clear.
I am sorry, Ned. But you did go to the other end of the world and leave me here alone. You're not angry, are you?
No, not at all. I think I'm going to leave.
I was at the door when I suddenly asked the little red-haired husband something.
How did you do it? Did you find hidden treasure? Did you fly over the channel? What kind of hero are you? What do you do?
I'm a solicitor's clerk at Johnson and Merivale's, 41 Chancery Lane.
And so, the Daily Gazette got the story of the century, and I walked into the night a broken-hearted hero. But at least I had a great adventure I could remember for the rest of my life. And I can thank Gladys for that.